In a Nevada boardroom, a 68-year-old widow was about to witness her husband's legacy under attack. What started as a monthly meeting took a shocking turn when they dismissed her warnings about corporate predator Victoria Sterling. Amelia Johnson wasn't your typical grieving widow. For 40 years, she had built tech empires alongside her husband, known for her razor-sharp business instincts. When she encountered the board's patronizing dismissal, she had no idea she was walking into the ultimate test of power. Amelia chose silence that would lead to a devastating revelation. What began as ageist dismissal would become corporate warfare. The company would never recover from learning their critics secretly owned it all. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Amelia Johnson adjusted her reading glasses and settled deeper into the uncomfortable plastic chair at the back of Silver State Development's conference room. The monthly board meeting was already 15 minutes behind schedule, but nobody seemed to notice her presence among the scattered papers and empty coffee cups that marked her territory in the furthest corner from the mahogany table where the real decisions were made. "Gentlemen," Frank Mitchell's voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent decades commanding construction crews, "we need to address this Sterling situation before it gets out of hand." At 68, Amelia had learned to read rooms the way her late husband David had read blueprints, methodically, looking for structural weaknesses and hidden supports. Today's weakness was glaringly obvious, panic barely contained beneath masculine bravado. The hidden support, unfortunately, was her. "Victoria Sterling's initial offer is insulting," Frank continued, his weathered hands gripping the acquisition proposal like it might bite him. 40% below market value. She thinks we're desperate. Jake Harrison, the company's chief operating officer, shifted in his seat. At 58, Jake carried himself with the careful posture of a man who'd climbed from hard hat to corner office through sheer determination. "Frank, we need to consider what? Rolling over for some corporate shark who thinks she can waltz in here and pick our bones clean?" Amelia cleared her throat softly. "Perhaps we should examine why she's confident enough to make such a low offer." The room fell silent for exactly 3 seconds, long enough for every man present to remember she existed, then dismiss her again. Frank's expression softened into the patronizing smile he reserved for well-meaning but misguided women. "Amelia, I appreciate your concern, but this is complex business strategy. Sterling's just fishing, seeing if we'll panic and accept anything." Heat rose in Amelia's chest, but her expression remained neutral. 43 years of building and selling tech companies had taught her when to fight and when to gather intelligence. "I understand business strategy, Frank. I'm suggesting Sterling wouldn't make an opening bid this low unless she has information about our financial position that makes her confident we'll eventually accept." Board member Harold Curtis, a man whose primary qualification seemed to be playing golf with Frank for 20 years, actually chuckled. "Mrs. Johnson, Victoria Sterling built her reputation on lowball offers. It's just how these corporate raiders operate." "Actually," Jake said quietly, "Amelia has a point. Sterling's track record shows she typically opens at 60 to 70% of market value, not 40%. This is different." Frank's jaw tightened. "Jake, you're overthinking this. We've weathered storms before." But Amelia was watching Jake's face, seeing the recognition there. He understood what the numbers meant, even if Frank refused to acknowledge them. The company's debt-to-equity ratio had been climbing steadily since the pandemic. 3 major projects had gone over budget. 2 clients had delayed payments by months. Frank's pride wouldn't let him admit it, but Silver State Development was bleeding money. "The quarterly reports show some concerning trends," Amelia said carefully. "Cash flow issues, project overruns, our cash flow is fine," Frank interrupted, but his voice lacked conviction. "David and I built this company from nothing. We know how to handle temporary setbacks." The mention of her husband's name hit Amelia like a physical blow. David would have listened to her. David had respected her insights, built their partnership on mutual trust and shared vision. But David had been dead 5 years, and Frank seemed determined to pretend the brilliant woman who'd helped engineer David's success was nothing more than a grieving widow with too much time on her hands. Emma Mitchell, Frank's daughter and the company's head of operations, finally spoke up. "Dad, maybe we should at least explore what makes Sterling so confident. If there's something we're missing, Emma, not you too." Frank's tone carried the exhaustion of a man fighting battles on multiple fronts. "I've been in this business for 30 years. I think I can recognize a predatory bid when I see one." Amelia watched the interplay between father and daughter with growing frustration. Emma had an MBA from Stanford and 15 years of experience with major firms, but Frank still treated her like an overeager intern. The casual dismissal of female Expertise was so ingrained in the company culture that the men didn't even recognize they were doing it. Perhaps, Amelia said, keeping her voice level, we should consider bringing in a financial consultant. Someone with experience in hostile takeover defense. Harold actually laughed. Amelia, you've been watching too many movies. This isn't some Wall Street thriller. It's a simple matter of telling Sterling to take her insulting offer and shove it. I agree with Harold, Frank said. We're not desperate enough to pay consultant fees for advice we don't need. But they were desperate. Amelia knew because she'd been quietly monitoring the company's finances for 3 years, ever since she'd anonymously invested her entire retirement portfolio to save Frank from bankruptcy. The shell companies and trust structures she'd created to hide her ownership were complex enough to fool casual scrutiny, but Victoria Sterling wasn't conducting casual scrutiny. As the meeting devolved into posturing and denial, Amelia found herself studying each man's face. Frank, blinded by pride and grief, unable to accept that his partnership with David was truly over. Harold, coasting on connections and convinced. His gut instincts trumped data. Jake, the only one with real business acumen, caught between loyalty and logic. And Emma, the most qualified person in the room after Amelia herself, relegated to the sidelines by an old boys network that couldn't see past her gender and parentage. The meeting's adjourned, Frank announced abruptly. We'll reconvene when Sterling makes a serious offer. Chairs scraped against linoleum as the men filed out, already shifting their attention to lunch plans and afternoon meetings. Emma lingered, gathering papers with sharp, frustrated movements. Amelia, she said quietly, you're absolutely right about bringing in help. Dad's too proud to admit it, but we're vulnerable right now. Your father loved mine, Amelia replied carefully. Sometimes grief makes us believe we have to handle everything alone. Emma's smile was bitter. In Dad's case, I think it's less about grief and more about being a stubborn old man who thinks women don't understand construction. After Emma left, Amelia remained in her corner seat, listening to the building settle around her. Through the conference room's single window, she could see the construction yard where crews were preparing for the afternoon shift. Somewhere in that maze of equipment and materials, Marcus Thompson was probably conducting his daily safety briefing. She gathered her things slowly, mind already working through the implications of what she'd observed. Victoria Sterling's confidence wasn't unfounded. She clearly had inside information about Silver State's financial weakness. The question was how she'd obtained it, and what other surprises she might have in store. Amelia made her way through the administrative offices, noting the worn carpeting and outdated computers that spoke to a company operating on thin margins. In the lobby, she paused at the memorial wall Frank had installed after David's death. Her husband's photo smiled down at her, surrounded by images of completed projects and satisfied workers. What would you do, David? She whispered. But she already knew the answer. David would have fought, not from pride but from responsibility to the people who depended on the company for their livelihoods. The difference was, David would have fought smart, using every available resource and ally. Outside, the Nevada heat hit her like a physical force, but Amelia barely noticed. She walked across the parking lot toward the construction yard, her sensible shoes crunching on gravel. Workers nodded respectfully as she passed. Most remembered her from the years when David would bring her to company picnics and project celebrations. She found Marcus Thompson near the equipment staging area, his weathered face serious as he reviewed safety protocols with a group of younger workers. At 65, Marcus carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who'd spent decades keeping people alive in dangerous conditions. Mrs. Johnson, he said, dismissing the crew with a nod. Good to see you, Marcus. She waited until they were alone before continuing. How are the men feeling about the Sterling situation? His gray eyes studied her face. Worried. These boys got families, mortgages. Nobody wants to start over at their age. He paused, then added carefully, course, some of us remember when things looked pretty bleak before. Company found a way through then. It was as close as Marcus would come to acknowledging what he suspected about her role in the company's survival 3 years ago. He'd worked with David for 20 years, had probably heard enough late-night conversations to piece together more than Frank realized. These are different circumstances, Amelia said. Yes, ma'am. They are. Marcus adjusted his hard hat, a gesture she recognized as nervous habit. Mrs. Johnson, if you don't mind me asking, what's your read on this Sterling woman? The question caught her off guard. Marcus rarely asked for opinions on corporate matters, preferring to focus on the practical realities of construction work. Why do you ask? Because you got the same look in your eyes you had when Mr. David was working through a particularly tricky engineering problem. Like you're seeing something the rest of us are missing. Amelia felt a flutter of panic. If Marcus could read Her that easily, how long before others started asking questions? I think Victoria Sterling is very good at what she does. And what she does is acquire distressed companies. And Frank? Frank is very good at building things. He's less experienced. At protecting them. Marcus nodded slowly. Company picnics coming up next month. Mr. David always said it was important for folks to feel like family, especially during hard times. He did say that. The memory brought unexpected tears to her eyes. Maybe this year, people need to be reminded that family takes care of family. No matter what form that care takes. He touched the brim of his hard hat in a gesture of respect and walked away, leaving Amelia standing alone among the massive machines that built Reno's skyline. The smell of diesel fuel and hot metal filled her nostrils, carrying memories of countless evenings when David had come home exhausted but satisfied, his clothes carrying these same scents. As she walked back toward her car, Amelia's mind was already working through scenarios and strategies. The board meeting had confirmed her worst fears about the company's vulnerability, but it had also revealed something else. Frank's pride was going to make him an ineffective defender against someone like Victoria Sterling. She'd spent 3 years in the shadows, watching and learning, testing whether these people would respect her insights without knowing her power. The answer was painfully clear. Frank, for all his loyalty to David's memory, saw her as a relic of the past rather than a resource for the future. But Victoria Sterling wasn't going to wait for Frank to overcome his prejudices. She was already moving, already planning, already positioning herself to take everything David and Frank had built. Amelia reached her car and paused with her hand on the door handle, looking back at the Silver State Development building. From here, she could see the conference room window where she'd spent the morning being dismissed and patronized by men who desperately needed her help. The irony was almost unbearable. She owned 51% of the company, held the power to protect every job and preserve David's legacy, but exercising that power would destroy the authentic relationships she'd worked so hard to build. Unless she could find another way. Starting the engine, Amelia made a decision that would change everything. It was time to learn exactly what Victoria Sterling was planning, and that meant getting closer to the enemy than she'd ever intended. Marcus's hand tightened on his clipboard as he watched Amelia drive away from the construction yard. Her visit had left him unsettled, though he couldn't quite articulate why. In his experience, when Mrs. Johnson started asking questions about company morale, changes were coming, the kind that usually benefited the workers, even if management never figured out how or why. The rumble of expensive engines interrupted his thoughts. A convoy of black SUVs pulled into the visitor parking area, their Nevada plates pristine despite the desert dust that coated everything else in Reno. Marcus squinted against the afternoon glare, watching as impeccably dressed figures emerged from the vehicles like an invasion force in tailored suits. Victoria Sterling stepped out of the lead vehicle with the confidence of someone who owned everything she surveyed. At 62, she carried herself with predatory grace, her silver hair swept into a style that probably cost more than most of his crew made in a week. Even from a distance, Marcus could feel the dangerous energy radiating from her, the kind of person who smiled while calculating exactly how much your life was worth. "Gentlemen," Frank Mitchell's voice boomed across the yard as he hurried to greet the visitors, "welcome to Silver State Development." Marcus retreated to the equipment shed, but kept one eye on the proceedings. Years of construction work had taught him that the real action often happened in conversations that weren't meant for his ears. Victoria's laugh carried across the dusty space, musical and completely artificial. "Mr. Mitchell, thank you for accommodating our site visit on such short notice. I always believe in seeing operations firsthand before making significant investments." Investments? Marcus spat into the dirt. He'd heard enough corporate doublespeak to know a circling vulture when he saw one. Inside the Silver State building, Jake Harrison was discovering exactly how dangerous Victoria Sterling could be when she wanted something. The executive conference room had been hastily prepared for the meeting, but somehow the polished mahogany table and leather chairs looked shabby compared to the woman sitting across from him. "Mr. Harrison," Victoria said, her voice carrying the warmth of a Nevada winter, "I've been reviewing your background. 30 years with Silver State, worked your way up from the construction crews, MBA earned while managing a full-time position. Impressive dedication." Jake felt uncomfortable under her scrutiny. "Thank you, Miss Sterling. Frank and I have built something special here. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story." "Frank, yes." Victoria's smile sharpened. "A good man, I'm sure. But tell me, Mr. Harrison, do you ever feel that your talents are being underutilized?" The question hit closer to home than Jake cared to admit. He'd been COO for 8 years, watching younger executives at other companies leapfrog into CEO positions while Frank showed no signs of stepping down. I'm committed to Silver State development. Of course you are. Loyalty is admirable. Victoria opened a leather portfolio, her manicured fingers sliding documents across the table. But loyalty shouldn't prevent a man from recognizing opportunity when it presents itself. Jake glanced at the papers, financial projections, organizational charts, compensation packages. The numbers made his breath catch. The proposed salary was nearly double his current income, with stock options that could set him up for a comfortable retirement. This is what we envision for Silver State's new leadership structure, Victoria continued. Someone with operational experience, someone the workers respect, someone who understands both the company's history and its potential future. You're offering me Frank's job. I'm offering you the position you've earned through decades of dedicated service. Victoria leaned back, her gray eyes never leaving his face. Mr. Mitchell built an impressive company, but building and managing are different skill sets. You have both. Jake's mouth went dry. Everything she was saying made sense from a business perspective. Frank's decisions had become increasingly erratic, driven more by emotion than strategy. The company needed fresh leadership, modern thinking, someone who could navigate the complexities of today's market. What about Frank? Mr. Mitchell would retain a consulting role, of course. His experience would be invaluable during the transition. Victoria's tone suggested this was a generous concession rather than the corporate exile Jake knew it really was. Before Jake could respond, Emma Mitchell burst into the conference room, her face flushed with barely controlled anger. I'm sorry to interrupt, but Dad, we need to talk. Now. Frank looked embarrassed by his daughter's unprofessional entrance. Emma, we're in the middle of important discussions about selling the company? Without consulting the head of operations? Emma's voice rose dangerously. How exactly did you plan to handle that conversation? Victoria watched the family drama unfold with obvious amusement. Ms. Mitchell, isn't it? I've heard excellent things about your work. Perhaps you'd like to join our discussion. I'd rather have a root canal, Emma shot back. Dad, outside. Now. After they left, Victoria turned her attention back to Jake. Family businesses, she said with mock sympathy. So much emotional baggage. It's admirable that Mr. Mitchell wants to include his daughter, but sentiment rarely makes for sound business decisions. Jake found himself nodding. Emma was brilliant, but her relationship with Frank complicated every strategic discussion. Professional decisions got tangled up with family dynamics, slowing down processes that should be straightforward. Of course, Victoria continued, under new leadership, personnel decisions would be made based purely on merit and company needs. No more walking on eggshells around family sensitivities. The implication was clear. Emma's position would be evaluated like any other employee's, without the protection of nepotism. Jake felt a stab of guilt. Emma was genuinely talented and had earned her role, but Victoria's point about professional objectivity resonated. Outside in the parking lot, Emma was having the argument Jake could hear through the conference room windows. Dad, you can't seriously be considering this. Sterling's reputation is built on dismantling family companies and selling them for parts. She's offering fair market value, Emma. More than fair, actually. She's offering 30% less than what this company was worth 2 years ago, and you know it. Frank's voice carried the exhaustion of a man under siege. 2 years ago, we weren't carrying this much debt. The market's changed, the economy's shifted. Maybe it's time to consider that holding on isn't always the smart choice. Jake watched through the window as Emma's expression shifted from anger to something approaching panic. She was beginning to understand what he'd already figured out. Frank was seriously considering Sterling's offer, not because it was good for the company, but because he was tired of fighting battles he wasn't sure he could win. When the father-daughter argument moved inside, Victoria seized the opportunity to plant more seeds. It's difficult, watching talented people struggle under leadership that's lost its vision. Mr. Mitchell built something remarkable, but he's holding on to the past instead of embracing the future. Frank's not ready to retire, Jake said, but his protest lacked conviction. Retirement isn't failure, Mr. Harrison. It's recognition that every leader has a season, and knowing when to pass the torch is the mark of wisdom. Victoria closed her portfolio with finality. I'll be in Reno for the rest of the week. Take some time to consider what kind of future you want, for yourself and for the company you've spent your life building. As the Sterling convoy departed, Jake remained in the conference room, staring at the financial projections that represented everything he'd worked toward for 30 years. The numbers were seductive, the logic compelling. But somewhere in the back of his mind, he kept hearing Amelia Johnson's voice from that morning's board meeting, warning them that Sterling's confidence suggested inside information. The question that haunted him as evening approached wasn't whether Victoria Sterling was right about the company's need for new leadership. The question was how she'd known exactly which buttons to push to make him want to believe her. Outside, Marcus Thompson was securing the equipment yard for the night, but his attention kept drifting to the conference room windows where Jake Harrison sat alone, surrounded by papers that would determine the fate of every worker in the company. Marcus had seen enough corporate takeovers to recognize the signs, and what he was seeing now looked like the beginning of the end. What he couldn't know was that 2 miles away, Amelia Johnson was conducting her own research into Victoria Sterling's background, and what she was discovering would change everything. The sound of Jake Harrison's car pulling out of the Silver State parking lot echoed off the surrounding buildings as Amelia Johnson sat in her Lexus 3 blocks away, phone pressed to her ear. She'd been waiting for 30 minutes, watching the corporate visitors leave while her private investigator delivered his preliminary report on Victoria Sterling. The woman's a ghost when it comes to personal information, Detective Ray Morrison's gravelly voice carried the weight of 20 years in corporate investigations. But her business track record? That's a different story. 12 family construction companies acquired in the past 5 years. Every single one gutted and sold within 18 months. Amelia's grip tightened on the steering wheel. What about her financing? Someone's backing these acquisitions. That's where it gets interesting. Shell companies, overseas investors, the whole 9 yards. But I found something peculiar. 3 of her recent targets had the same vulnerability, anonymous majority shareholders who couldn't respond quickly to hostile offers. The words hit Amelia like a physical blow. Sterling wasn't just hunting distressed companies, she was specifically targeting businesses with hidden ownership structures. Which meant her interest in Silver State development wasn't coincidental. Ray, I need you to dig deeper. Find out who's feeding her information about company finances. Already on it. But Amelia, if this woman has inside intel on Silver State's ownership structure, she doesn't know about me yet. But she knows something's off about the company's finances, and she's betting Frank doesn't have the resources to fight back. Amelia ended the call and stared at the construction company's modest headquarters. Somewhere inside that building, people she cared about were making decisions based on incomplete information, and her silence was partly to blame. Her phone buzzed with a text from her son Ryan. Mom, need to talk. It's urgent. 20 minutes later, Amelia sat across from Ryan in the corner booth of a dimly lit casino restaurant, watching her 42-year-old son fidget with a coffee cup he hadn't touched. The establishment's garish decor and constant electronic chiming created an atmosphere of desperate optimism that perfectly matched Ryan's current state. The restaurant chains are officially done, Ryan said without preamble. Bankruptcy filing goes through next week. Amelia felt her heart sink. Ryan's 3 restaurants had been his pride and joy, local establishments that had thrived for years. Before the pandemic changed everything. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I know how much they meant to you. It gets worse. Ryan's hands shook slightly as he finally lifted his coffee. I borrowed against the expected insurance payout to keep paying employees. Turns out insurance doesn't cover acts of God when those acts include government-mandated shutdowns. How much do you owe? $250,000. To people who don't accept payment plans. Ryan's laugh held no humor. Funny thing about casino investors, they're real understanding until they're not. Amelia studied her son's face, seeing the same stubborn pride that had driven both his father and herself to build empires rather than accept help. Ryan, if you need, I don't want your money, Mom. The words came out sharper than intended. I need to understand why Dad could build something lasting and I can't even keep a neighborhood restaurant afloat. The pain in his voice reopened wounds that had never fully healed. Ryan had spent his entire adult life trying to measure up to parents who'd succeeded at everything they touched, and now his failures were literally threatening his life. Your father failed plenty of times before he found his calling, Amelia said gently. The difference was, he had partners who could help shoulder the load when things got tough. Partners like you mean? Ryan's smile was bitter. Right. The woman who sold her tech companies for enough money to buy half of Nevada, lecturing her broke son about partnerships. That's not what I meant, isn't it? Ryan leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. Mom, I know you're not just living off Dad's pension and Social Security. The house, the car, the way you always seem to have money for emergencies. Where does it come from? Amelia felt the familiar weight of secrets pressing down on her chest. For 3 years, she'd maintained her fiction of being a comfortable but not wealthy widow, partly to test people's reactions to her ideas without the influence of money, partly to protect herself from exactly this kind of family pressure. Your father and I made good investments over the years, cut the crap, Mom. Ryan's desperation made his voice harsh. I'm 42 years old and facing bankruptcy while my mother drives a car that costs more than most people's houses. Either you're hiding serious money, or you're drowning in debt and too proud to admit it. Before Amelia could respond, her phone rang. Emma Mitchell's name appeared on the screen, and Amelia felt grateful for the interruption. I need to take this. Mrs. Johnson? Emma's voice was strained. I'm sorry to bother you, but I could really use someone to talk to. Someone who understands what it's like to be dismissed by men who think they know better. Amelia glanced at Ryan, who was staring out the window at the casino floor where desperate people fed money into machines that promised impossible dreams. Of course, dear. Where would you like to meet? An hour later, Amelia sat in Emma's downtown apartment, listening to Frank Mitchell's daughter pour out her frustrations over a bottle of wine that was probably worth more than most Silver State employees made in a week. He's actually considering Sterling's offer, Emma said, pacing between her kitchen and living room. 30 years of building something meaningful, and he's ready to sell it to a corporate vulture because he's tired of fighting. Your father's been through a lot since David died, Amelia offered carefully. Sometimes grief makes us want to escape responsibilities that feel too heavy. It's not grief, it's pride. Emma collapsed onto her couch, wine glass trembling in her hand. He can't stand the idea that he might need help, especially from women. You saw how he treated you in that meeting, like your 40 years of business experience meant nothing because you happened to be married to his partner instead of being his partner. The words stung because they were true. Frank's casual dismissal of her insights wasn't just frustrating, it was a betrayal of everything she and David had built together. Emma, if the company's really in trouble, maybe bringing in outside help isn't the worst idea. Outside help, yes. Victoria Sterling, absolutely not. Emma leaned forward, her eyes bright with unshed tears. That woman spent 2 hours today explaining to Dad how much more efficient the company would be with professional management instead of family sentiment. She made it sound like caring about employees was a business weakness. Amelia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the apartment's air conditioning. Sterling wasn't just targeting the company's finances, she was systematically undermining the values that made Silver State development worth saving. What did your father say to that? That's the worst part, I could see her getting to him. All that talk about professional objectivity and market efficiency. She made it sound like his loyalty to longtime employees was preventing the company from reaching its potential. As Emma continued talking, Amelia's phone buzzed with another text from Ryan. Mom, whoever you owe money to, maybe we can work together to figure this out. I love you. The irony was devastating. Her son thought she was hiding debt when she was actually hiding wealth that could solve both their problems. But revealing her financial position would expose the web of lies she'd built around her ownership of Silver State Development, and Emma was currently trusting her as a fellow woman struggling against male dismissal in the business world. Emma, Amelia said carefully, what would you do if you had the power to save the company? If you could make the decisions instead of watching your father make them? I'd fight. Emma's response was immediate and fierce. I'd find out exactly what Sterling knows that we don't, and I'd use that information to protect our people. But I'm just the boss's daughter, remember? My opinion doesn't count when the real men are talking. As Amelia drove home through Reno's neon-lit streets, her mind churned through impossible choices. Ryan needed help she could easily provide, but doing so would raise questions about her finances that could expose her role at Silver State. Emma needed an ally who understood the business world, but maintaining that alliance meant continuing to lie about her true position in the company. And somewhere in the shadows, Victoria Sterling was gathering intelligence and recruiting allies, confident that no one at Silver State Development had the resources or knowledge to mount an effective defense. Amelia pulled into her driveway and sat in the darkness, staring at the house she'd shared with David for 20 years. The mortgage had been paid off long ago with money from their various business ventures, but tonight it felt like a prison built from secrets and good intentions gone wrong. Tomorrow, she decided, she would start making some very difficult phone calls. Because Victoria Sterling's confidence suggested she had inside information, and there were only so many people with access to Silver State Development's true financial picture. Someone close to Frank was feeding information to the enemy. And until Amelia figured out who, everyone she cared about remained in danger. Frank Mitchell's coffee had gone cold hours ago, but he continued gripping the mug like an anchor as he stared at the financial reports scattered across his desk. The numbers hadn't changed since yesterday, but somehow they looked worse in the harsh fluorescent light of his office at 6 in the morning. The sound of Emma's heels clicking down the hallway announced her arrival before she appeared in his doorway, looking as exhausted as he felt. Dad, we need to talk about the Brennan Industries offer. Already rejected it. Frank didn't look up from his papers. 20% below market value. Another vulture trying to pick our bones. It was 15% below, and they included job protection guarantees for 18 months. Emma's voice carried the careful patience of someone who'd had this argument before. Dad, that's not vulture behavior. That's a legitimate white knight offer. Frank finally raised his eyes, and Emma was startled by how much older he'd aged in the past week. White knights don't exist in this business, Emma. They're all predators wearing different masks. So what's your plan? Wait for Sterling to lower her offer again? My plan is to fight. Frank's voice carried the conviction of a man who'd built an empire from nothing. Your old man didn't survive 40 years in construction by rolling over every time someone threw money at him. Emma sat down across from his desk, her expression shifting from frustration to something approaching desperation. Dad, I've run the numbers 6 different ways. Our cash flow can't sustain another quarter like the last one. The Henderson project is 3 weeks behind schedule. The materials costs on the airport expansion have blown our budget by 30%, and we've got 2 major clients who haven't paid invoices in 4 months. We've weathered storms before. Not like this. And not without David. The words hung in the air between them like an accusation. Emma immediately regretted saying them, but they couldn't be taken back. Frank's face went ashen. Your uncle? David isn't coming through that door to save us, Emma. It's just you and me now. Then why won't you listen to me? Before Frank could answer, his secretary's voice crackled through the intercom. Mr. Mitchell? You have a call from Marcus Thompson. Says it's urgent. Frank grabbed the phone, grateful for the interruption. Marcus, what's going on? Frank, you need to get down to the yard. The crews are asking questions I can't answer. Marcus's voice was tight with concern. Word's gotten out about Sterling's offer, and people are scared. Real scared. 20 minutes later, Frank stood in the equipment yard facing 60 construction workers whose faces reflected the kind of fear that came with mortgages, medical bills, and college tuition payments. Marcus had organized them into a loose semicircle around the maintenance shed, but the formation felt more like an intervention than a meeting. Mr. Mitchell, called out Jimmy Santos, a crane operator who'd been with the company for 15 years. My wife heard Sterling's people were asking questions at the bank about our pension fund. That true? Frank felt his stomach drop. Sterling's due diligence was supposed to be confidential, but somehow word was leaking to the financial community. Jimmy, our pension fund is secure. Nobody's touching your retirement. What about our jobs? This from Maria Gonzalez, one of the few female foremen in the company. Sterling's got a reputation for bringing in outside crews, cutting labor costs. Sterling doesn't own this company, and she's not going to. Frank's voice carried more confidence than he felt. We've built something here that can't be bought or sold. A family. But even as he spoke the words, Frank could see the doubt in their faces. These weren't naive workers who believed in corporate fairy tales. They'd all seen family businesses get swallowed by larger companies, watched longtime employees get discarded in the name of efficiency. Marcus stepped forward, his weathered face grave. Frank, these folks need to know you've got a real plan. Not just fighting spirit, but actual strategy. The strategy is simple. We don't sell. We work harder, we tighten our belts, and we prove that Sterling's wrong about our viability. Frank looked around the circle of faces, seeing his own father in some of the older workers, his future grandchildren in the younger ones. This company survived the recession of 2008, the pandemic, market crashes, and boom-bust cycles. We'll survive, Victoria Sterling. But as the workers dispersed back to their duties, Frank caught the worried glances they exchanged, the way conversations stopped when he walked past. For the first time in his career, he realized that his certainty wasn't enough to calm their fears. Later that afternoon, Jake Harrison knocked on Frank's office door with the expression of a man carrying bad news. Frank, we need to discuss the Sterling situation. If you're here to tell me we should consider her offer, I'm here to tell you she's made contact with 3 of our biggest clients. Jake closed the door behind him and sat down without being invited. She's suggesting they might want to review their contract terms, given our current financial instability. Frank felt the world tilt slightly. She can't do that. Those are confidential business relationships. She's not breaking any laws, Frank. She's just planting seeds of doubt. Jake's voice was gentle but firm. And those seeds are finding fertile ground because our clients know we're struggling. For the first time since Victoria Sterling had appeared in his life, Frank Mitchell began to understand that his pride might not be enough to protect everything he'd built. But even that realization wasn't enough to make him consider surrender. Outside his office window, the construction yard buzzed with activity as crews prepared for the next day's work, unaware that their future hung in the balance of one stubborn man's refusal to admit he might need help. Jake Harrison's hands trembled slightly as he signed his name to the confidential agreement Victoria Sterling had placed before him. The Atlantis Casino's executive suite felt like a temple to ambition. Its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Reno's glittering skyline, a reminder of what power could buy. "You're making the right choice, Mr. Harrison," Victoria said, sliding the signed document into her leather portfolio. "Sometimes loyalty requires difficult decisions." Jake stared out at the city lights, trying to reconcile his actions with 30 years of genuine affection for Frank Mitchell. "Frank's been like a father to me. This feels like betrayal?" Victoria's smile was understanding but cold. "Or like finally taking responsibility for the welfare of 200 employees who depend on competent leadership?" Mr. Mitchell's pride is admirable, but pride doesn't pay mortgages or fund retirement accounts. The rationalization sounded reasonable, but Jake's stomach churned anyway. He'd just agreed to provide Sterling with inside information about Silver State's board discussions, client relationships, and financial vulnerabilities. In exchange, she'd guaranteed him the CEO position when the acquisition completed, along with a compensation package that would secure his future. "The board meeting is scheduled for Friday," Jake heard himself saying. "Frank's planning to reject your revised offer without even presenting it to the full board. How very frank of him." Victoria poured herself a glass of wine from the suite's well-stocked bar. "What about employee sentiment? Are the workers still solidly behind him?" Jake thought about the fear he'd seen in the construction yard. That morning, the way conversations stopped when management walked by. "They're scared. Rumors are spreading about layoffs, pension cuts. Marcus Thompson's been trying to keep morale up, but even the most loyal soldiers eventually question leadership that marches them toward a cliff." Victoria nodded approvingly. "What about the daughter? Emma, isn't it?" "Emma's brilliant, but Frank won't listen to her. She's been pushing for strategic partnerships, outside consultation, anything that might stabilize the company without selling it outright. And you? What do you tell her when she asks for your support?" Jake's silence was answer enough. He'd been avoiding Emma for 3 days, unable to look her in the eye knowing what he'd agreed to do. Emma trusted him, respected his judgment, saw him as an ally in her efforts to modernize the company's approach to crisis management. "She'll understand eventually," Victoria said, interpreting his expression correctly. "When she sees how much more effectively the company operates under professional management, she'll realize this was necessary." But even as Victoria spoke, Emma Mitchell was discovering exactly what Jake had done. She'd stayed late to review client contracts, hoping to find leverage Frank could use against Sterling's pressure campaign. The executive offices were empty except for the cleaning crew, which was why she heard Jake's voice so clearly through his partially open door as he spoke on his cell phone. "No, the pension fund audit won't be a problem. Frank's too proud to bring in outside accountants, so you'll have at least 2 weeks before anyone realizes what you're looking for." Jake's voice was low, conspiratorial. "The Hartford Industries contract renewal is Frank's biggest vulnerability. If Sterling can convince them to delay signing." Emma felt the blood drain from her face as she realized what she was hearing. Jake Harrison, her father's most trusted lieutenant, the man she'd confided in about her fears for the company, was feeding information directly to Victoria Sterling. She backed away from his door, her mind reeling. How long had this been going on? How many of her private conversations with Jake had been passed along to Sterling? How many strategic discussions had been compromised? Her phone buzzed with a text from Amelia Johnson, "Available to talk if you need a friendly ear tonight." 20 minutes later, Emma sat in Amelia's living room, shaking with rage and betrayal. 30 years of loyalty, and he throws it away for what? A bigger salary? A corner office? Amelia poured tea with steady hands, but her mind was racing. Jake's betrayal changed everything. It explained Sterling's confidence, her insider knowledge of the company's vulnerabilities, her ability to pressure clients and suppliers with information that should have been confidential. Emma, who else has access to the kind of information Jake was discussing? The senior management team. Me, Dad, Jake, and the department heads. But most of what I heard was board-level information. Financial data, client relationships, strategic planning. Emma's voice was bitter. Information I shared with him because I thought we were working together to save the company. Amelia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. If Jake was Sterling's inside source, then her own secret was potentially at risk. Jake had been present for board discussions about the company's mysterious financial turnaround 3 years ago. He'd seen the shell company documentation, heard Frank's speculation about their anonymous benefactor. "Emma, I need to ask you something. And I need you to think carefully before you answer." Has Jake ever mentioned anything about the company's ownership structure? About who might have provided the capital that saved Silver State from bankruptcy? Emma looked puzzled. He's asked a few questions over the years. Dad's always been vague about where the money came from, just said it was a private investor who wanted to remain anonymous. Why? Because if Jake had pieced together the truth about her identity, then Victoria Sterling might already know exactly who she was dealing with. And if Sterling knew about Amelia's ownership stake, then her confidence in acquiring the company made perfect sense. She could simply wait for the anonymous owner to reveal themselves, then negotiate directly. Amelia's phone rang, interrupting her spiraling thoughts. The caller ID showed Ray Morrison, her private investigator. Amelia, we've got a problem. Sterling's financing is coming from a consortium of Chinese investors, but there's something else. 3 of her previous acquisitions were companies with hidden majority shareholders. She's developed a specialty in forcing anonymous owners into the open by creating enough chaos that they have to act to protect their investments. The pieces clicked into place with devastating clarity. Victoria Sterling wasn't just acquiring Silver State Development, she was hunting Amelia specifically. The lowball offers, the pressure on employees and clients, the recruitment of inside sources like Jake, it was all designed to force the mysterious owner out of hiding. Ray, I need you to find out everything you can about Jake Harrison's financial situation. Gambling debts, investment losses, anything that might make him vulnerable to recruitment. After ending the call, Amelia found Emma watching her with sharp interest. Mrs. Johnson, you're asking very specific questions about corporate espionage and hidden ownership. Is there something you're not telling me? Before Amelia could answer, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Ms. Johnson, we should meet. I believe we have mutual interests regarding Silver State Development. V. Sterling, the predator, had revealed herself, and Amelia realized with growing dread that the hunt was about to enter its final phase. Victoria Sterling knew exactly who she was, and tomorrow's board meeting would determine whether Amelia could protect her secret long enough to save the company, or whether Sterling's trap would finally spring shut. Emma was still waiting for an answer, her eyes bright with suspicion and hope. Mrs. Johnson, if you know something that could help save the company, you have to tell me. Please. Amelia looked at this brilliant, passionate woman who'd trusted her with fears and frustrations, who'd seen her as an ally in fighting workplace discrimination. Tomorrow, Emma would learn that their entire relationship had been built on a foundation of lies. Emma, Amelia said quietly, there are things about this situation that are more complicated than they appear. But I promise you, I'm going to do everything in my power to protect your father's company and the people who work there. It wasn't the truth Emma deserved, but it was all the truth Amelia could offer. Because in less than 18 hours, Victoria Sterling's patience would run out, and the silent partner would finally have to step into the light. Amelia's hands shook as she poured coffee at 5:30 in the morning, Victoria Sterling's text message still glowing on her phone screen. The predator wanted to meet, which meant the game was entering its final phase. But first, there was Emma. She'd asked Emma to come early, before the emergency board meeting that would decide Silver State's fate. The young woman arrived looking haggard, her eyes red from a sleepless night spent grappling with Jake's betrayal. Mrs. Johnson, I've been thinking about your questions last night, Emma said, accepting the coffee with trembling hands. You knew things about Sterling's methods, about corporate espionage tactics. That's not knowledge you get from reading business magazines. Amelia sat across from Emma at her kitchen table, the same table where she and David had planned their empire, where they'd celebrated victories and weathered failures. Now it would witness the hardest conversation of her life. Emma, what I'm about to tell you will change everything between us. You have every right to hate me when I'm finished. Just tell me. 3 years ago, when your father's company was facing bankruptcy, an anonymous investor provided the capital that saved Silver State Development. Amelia's voice was steady, but her heart hammered against her ribs. That investor was me. I own 51% of the company. Emma's coffee cup hit the table with enough force to splash brown liquid across the white surface. What? I used shell companies and trust structures to hide my ownership. I wanted to observe how the company operated, how people treated each other, whether the culture David and your father built was authentic or just performance. The words tumbled out faster now, 3 years of secrecy pouring forth. I needed to know if the investment was worthwhile, if the people were worth saving. Emma's face cycled through shock, confusion, and dawning comprehension. You've been lying to me for months. Every conversation we've had about workplace discrimination, about being dismissed by men who don't take us seriously, you've been playing a role. No. Amelia leaned forward desperately. Emma, my feelings about the dismissive treatment, the frustration with being underestimated, all of that was real. The only lie was my position in the company. Your position? Emma's laugh was sharp with betrayal. You mean the fact that you're my boss? That every time I complained about Dad's decisions, I was actually criticizing your employee? The accusation hit like a physical blow. Frank doesn't work for me, Emma. He's never known about my ownership. As far as he's concerned, he built Silver State with David and runs it himself. But you could have stopped all of this. Jake's betrayal, Sterling's pressure campaign, the workers' fear about their jobs, you had the power to end it anytime you wanted. At the cost of destroying every authentic relationship I'd built. Including ours. Amelia's voice broke slightly. Emma, you trusted me because you thought I understood what it was like to be dismissed and undervalued. If you'd known I was the majority owner, I would have treated you with the respect your position deserved instead of seeing you as a fellow victim. Emma stood abruptly, pacing to the window. God, how patronizing this must have seemed to you. The boss's daughter complaining about her treatment to the actual owner of the company. It wasn't patronizing. Your frustrations were valid, your insights brilliant. That's why I'm telling you the truth now. Amelia joined Emma at the window, looking out at the construction sites that dotted Reno's skyline. Because Sterling knows who I am, and today's board meeting is going to force me into the open. I need an ally who understands both sides of this fight. Emma turned to study Amelia's face, searching for something. What do you need from me? Help me save your father's company without destroying our friendship in the process. For a long moment, Emma said nothing. Then, quietly, the board meeting's in 3 hours. Sterling will be expecting you to reveal yourself to block her final offer. Which means she's counting on shock and chaos to give her an advantage. Amelia pulled out her phone, showing Emma the threatening text. She wants to meet beforehand, probably to negotiate directly with me. Don't go. I have to. But Emma, when the truth comes out in that boardroom, I need you to remember that everything I felt about the company's culture, about the way we've been treated, about the importance of protecting the workers, all of that was real. Emma nodded slowly, her anger giving way to something approaching understanding. Mrs. Johnson, Amelia, there's something you should know about today's meeting. Dad's planning to reject Sterling's offer outright, without even discussing it with the board. He's convinced that showing strength will make her back down. And Jake will be there, feeding every word back to Sterling. Exactly. Emma's expression hardened with determination. So maybe it's time the silent partner stopped being silent. The Silver State Development boardroom had never felt smaller. Amelia sat in her customary back corner, but today the plastic chair felt like a throne she wasn't ready to claim. Frank Mitchell paced at the head of the mahogany table while the board members shifted nervously in their leather seats, all too aware that Victoria Sterling's final ultimatum expired at 5 o'clock. Gentlemen, Frank began, his voice carrying forced confidence, we're here to formally reject Sterling's insulting offer and show her that Silver State Development isn't for sale at any price. Harold Curtis cleared his throat uncomfortably. Frank, maybe we should at least discuss the terms, there's nothing to discuss. Frank's interruption was sharp. 45% below fair market value, mass layoffs disguised as operational efficiency, and the dismantling of everything David and I built. The answer is no. Jake Harrison sat perfectly still, but Amelia could see the tension in his shoulders. He knew what Frank didn't, that Victoria Sterling was already in the building, waiting in the lobby with her legal team and acquisition documents. Jake's betrayal had given her the exact timeline she needed. Dad. Emma's voice cut through the posturing. Before we vote, there's something the board needs to know about our ownership structure. Frank looked irritated. Emma, this isn't the time for technical details, actually, it's exactly the time. Emma stood, her Stanford MBA authority finally matching her voice. 3 years ago, this company was saved from bankruptcy by an anonymous investor. That investor holds 51% of Silver State Development. The room erupted in confused murmurs. Harold Curtis leaned forward. Frank, who is this mysterious investor? Why haven't we been informed? Frank's face went ashen. We agreed on anonymity. The investor wanted privacy, and frankly, I was grateful enough not to ask too many questions. Well, I'm asking questions now, Harold said, his voice rising. If someone owns controlling interest in this company, they need to be part of this decision. Amelia felt every eye in the room searching for answers Frank couldn't provide. This was the moment she dreaded and anticipated for 3 years, the end of her invisibility, the death of her carefully constructed anonymity. She stood slowly, her legs unsteady beneath her. The anonymous investor is in this room. The silence was deafening. Frank stared at her with the expression of a man watching his world collapse. Amelia? I'm sorry, Frank. I'm so sorry you had to find out this way. Amelia walked to the front of the room, each step feeling like a betrayal of their friendship. When David died, you were drowning in grief and debt. The company was 3 weeks from bankruptcy, and you were too proud to ask for help. You? Frank's voice was barely a whisper. You've been, all this time, you've owned 51%, yes. Through shell companies and trust structures that protected both our privacy. Amelia faced the board, drawing on 4 decades of business experience to steady her voice. I invested my retirement portfolio to save this company because David believed in it, because you believed in it, and because 200 families depended on it. Jake Harrison finally spoke, his voice tight with realization. That's why Sterling's been so confident. She knows about your ownership structure. More than that. Amelia pulled out her phone, displaying Victoria Sterling's message. She's been hunting me specifically. This entire takeover attempt was designed to force me into the open. The boardroom doors opened with dramatic timing, and Victoria Sterling entered with her legal team like a general claiming conquered territory. Her silver hair was perfectly styled, her expression radiating the confidence of someone who'd just won a complex game. Gentlemen, Victoria said, then turned to Amelia with a smile that could cut glass. And Ms. Johnson. I believe we have business to discuss. Frank found his voice, though it shook with fury and betrayal. Get out. This is a private board meeting. Actually, Mr. Mitchell, this is a shareholders' meeting, and I represent significant financial interests in Silver State Development. Victoria placed a leather portfolio on the table. I've been acquiring debt obligations and supplier contracts for weeks. While I may not own shares directly, I control enough of your operational capacity to make continued business impossible. Amelia felt the trap closing around them. Sterling hadn't just been pressuring the company, she'd been systematically buying up their liabilities, creating a web of financial obligations that could strangle Silver State regardless of ownership. What do you want? Amelia asked quietly. Direct negotiation with the actual decision-maker. Victoria's smile widened. Your board meetings have been entertaining theater, Ms. Johnson, but we both know Mr. Mitchell hasn't had real authority for 3 years. The words hit Frank like physical blows. He stared at Amelia with the expression of a man realizing his entire life had been a performance. Amelia, tell me this isn't true. Tell me I haven't been playing pretend CEO while you pulled the strings. Frank, no. Amelia turned to him. Desperately. You've been running this company exactly as you and David always did. I never interfered with operational decisions, never overruled your judgment. I was just, insurance. Insurance? Frank's laugh was bitter. I'm 62 years old, Amelia. I've spent 3 years thinking I'd saved David's company through my own leadership, my own decisions. Now I find out I was just a frontman for your charity project. That's not, isn't it? Victoria Sterling's voice cut through their argument like a blade. Ms. Johnson, you've been playing games for 3 years, testing whether these people deserved your investment. Well, here's your test results. Mr. Mitchell's pride nearly destroyed the company, Mr. Harrison sold you out for personal advancement. And your workers are terrified for their futures because none of them understand who's really in charge. Emma stepped forward, her voice steady despite the chaos. The workers are terrified because you've been systematically undermining their security for weeks. This isn't about company management, it's about corporate predation. Victoria ignored Emma entirely, keeping her focus on Amelia. I'm prepared to offer 70% of current market value for your controlling stake. That's fair compensation for a company with serious management deficiencies. No. Amelia's voice carried the authority she'd hidden for 3 years. Silver State Development isn't for sale. Not to you, not at any price. Then you're prepared to watch it collapse? Because that's your only other option. I control your suppliers, your credit lines, and your largest clients. You can own 51% of nothing, or you can take my offer and walk away wealthy. The room held its breath as Amelia Johnson, the invisible observer who'd spent 3 years in the shadows, finally stepped fully into the light. Ms. Sterling, you've made one critical miscalculation in your research. Which is? You assumed I was hiding my ownership because I was afraid of responsibility. Amelia's smile was sharp as winter steel. I was hiding it because I wanted to understand exactly who I was dealing with before I acted. Now I know. Victoria Sterling's confident expression flickered for the first time. Ms. Johnson, the negotiation is over, Ms. Sterling. And so is your acquisition attempt. Amelia turned to face the board, her voice carrying the command presence of someone who'd built empires. Gentlemen, I'm exercising my majority ownership to reject Sterling's offer and authorize whatever legal action is necessary to break her stranglehold on our operations. For the first time since entering the room, Victoria Sterling looked uncertain. The game had changed, and the silent partner was silent no more. The boardroom emptied slowly after Victoria Sterling's strategic retreat, her legal team trailing behind her like the remnants of a defeated army. But the silence that followed felt more like the aftermath of an explosion than a victory. Frank Mitchell stood at the conference room window, his back to Amelia, his shoulders rigid with a mixture of rage and humiliation. 30 years, he said without turning around. 30 years I thought I was building something with my own hands, my own decisions. Turns out I was just your puppet. Amelia felt each word like a knife thrust. Frank, that's not true. Every decision you made was yours. Every success, every innovation, every relationship you built with the workers, that was all you. Was it? Frank finally turned, and Amelia was shocked by how much he'd aged in the past hour. Or was I just playing in a sandbox you built, pretending to be in charge while you watched from the shadows? Jake Harrison cleared his throat from the doorway, his resignation letter already in hand. The man who'd betrayed them all now looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of his choices. Frank, I owe you an explanation, you owe me nothing. Frank's voice was ice. 30 years of loyalty, and you sold me out for a corner office and a bigger salary. At least Amelia's betrayal came from love. Yours was just greed. Jake's face crumpled. Frank, I was scared. Scared of being forced into retirement, scared of losing everything I'd worked for. Sterling made it sound like the company was doomed anyway, like I was just choosing which sinking ship to abandon. Get out. Frank's words were barely audible. Clear out your office and get out of my building. Our building, Amelia corrected quietly, then immediately regretted it. Frank's expression hardened further. Right. Your building. Your company. Your employees. Frank gathered his papers with shaking hands. I'll have my resignation on your desk by morning. Frank, please what? Please continue this charade where I pretend to run a company I've never actually owned? Please keep lying to Emma about who's really making the decisions? Frank paused at the door. You want to know the worst part, Amelia? It's not that you lied to me. It's that you were right to. I would have been too proud to accept your help, too stubborn to let you save David's company. And that pride would have cost 200 people their jobs. He left without another word, and Amelia sank into the nearest chair, feeling the weight of 3 years of deception crushing down on her. Emma approached cautiously, her own emotions clearly raw from the revelations. Is he right? Emma asked. About the company being yours rather than his? No. Amelia looked up at David's daughter, seeing so much of her father in her fierce intelligence. Emma, what your father built with David was real. The loyalty of the workers, the quality of the work, the reputation in the community, that wasn't my money. That was their partnership, their vision, their sweat. But the power to make final decisions is something I never wanted to use. And something I'm terrified of using now. Amelia stood, moving to the window where Frank had stood moments before. I know how to run tech companies, Emma. I know algorithms and market disruption and venture capital. But construction? Managing crews? Understanding the daily rhythms of this business? That's your father's expertise, not mine. Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing everything that had changed in the past hour. What happens now? Now we try to rebuild what Sterling damaged. Starting with our people. Amelia turned back to Emma. I want you to call an all-hands meeting for this afternoon. The workers deserve to hear the truth directly from me, not through rumors and speculation. And Dad? Your father needs time to process this. Maybe space to decide what role he wants in a company where he's no longer pretending to be the owner. Amelia's voice carried a weight of sadness. I won't force him to stay, Emma. His dignity is worth more than my need. For his expertise. 2 hours later, the Silver State Development workforce gathered in the main equipment bay, their faces reflecting a mixture of relief and uncertainty. Word had spread about Sterling's departure, but the details remained murky. Amelia stood on a makeshift platform, looking out at faces she'd observed from the shadows for 3 years. My name is Amelia Johnson, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the cavernous space. 3 years ago, when this company was facing bankruptcy, I invested my life savings to keep it operational. I am the majority owner of Silver State Development. The murmurs rippled through the crowd like a wave. Marcus Thompson stood near the front, his weathered face unsurprised but concerned. I chose to remain anonymous because I wanted to understand who you were as people, not as employees trying to impress the boss. I wanted to see if the culture that David Johnson and Frank Mitchell built was genuine. Amelia paused, meeting as many eyes as she could. What I found was a company worth saving. Not just financially, but morally. What about Mr. Mitchell? Called out Jimmy Santos. Is he staying? That's Mr. Mitchell's decision to make. But I hope he will, because this company needs his leadership, his experience, and his vision. Amelia's voice strengthened. I may own this business, but I don't know how to run it. That takes people who understand construction, who've earned Your respect through decades of fair dealing and honest work. Maria Gonzalez raised her hand. Ma'am, what's going to change now that we know who you are? Hopefully, very little. You'll still report to your supervisors, still follow the same safety protocols, still work on the same projects. The difference is that when major decisions need to be made about the company's future, you'll know who's ultimately responsible for those decisions. And Sterling? This from Marcus Thompson. Is no longer a threat to your jobs or your pensions. We'll be taking legal action to break the contract she used to pressure us, and we'll be implementing stronger protections against future takeover attempts. As the meeting concluded and workers returned to their duties, Amelia noticed the subtle changes in how people looked at her. The casual friendliness was tempered now with a careful respect that spoke to her new status. She'd gained power but lost something precious in the process, the ability to simply be Amelia, David's widow who cared about the company. Emma approached as the bay emptied. That went better than I expected. Did it? I saw the way they looked at me afterward. Like I was suddenly a different person. You are a different person to them now. But maybe that's not entirely bad. Emma's smile was tentative but genuine. Maybe it's time for Silver State Development to have leadership. That doesn't hide behind masculine bluster and wounded pride. You mean your father? I mean the entire old boys network that's been running this company like it's 1995. Emma's voice carried a new confidence. Amelia, you've seen how they dismissed both of us in meetings. You've experienced the casual sexism, the assumptions about what women can and can't contribute to this business. Now you have the power to change that culture. As they walked back toward the administrative building, Amelia reflected on Emma's words. She'd revealed her identity to save the company from Victoria Sterling, but perhaps the real challenge was just beginning. Now she had to learn how to use power she'd never wanted while rebuilding relationships damaged by years of necessary deception. The question was whether Frank Mitchell would be part of that rebuilding process, or whether her revelation had cost her the one person who could help her honor David's legacy while protecting the future he'd envisioned. Outside Frank's office, his secretary mentioned he'd left for the day without saying when he'd return. His resignation letter sat on Amelia's desk, unsigned but symbolically devastating. The price of truth, it seemed, was higher than she'd ever imagined. 3 months had passed since the boardroom confrontation that changed everything at Silver State Development. Amelia sat in what had once been Frank's office. She'd moved into the CEO suite not out of ambition, but out of necessity. The company needed visible leadership, and Frank Mitchell had made his position clear by taking an extended leave of absence that everyone understood was really resignation. The morning sun streamed through windows that looked out over a construction yard buzzing with renewed activity. The Sterling crisis had paradoxically strengthened the company's position. Clients who'd been pressured by Victoria's tactics now returned with larger contracts, as if apologizing for their temporary doubt. But the personal costs of that victory weighed heavily on Amelia's shoulders. Emma knocked on the open door, carrying a tablet and wearing the confident expression of someone who'd found her place in the world. As the new chief operating officer, she'd thrown herself into modernizing Silver State's operations with the fervor of someone making up for lost time. The quarterly numbers are in, Emma announced, settling into the chair across from Amelia's desk. Revenue's up 18%, profit margins are the best they've been in 5 years, and we've got enough contract backlog to keep everyone employed through next spring. That's wonderful news. Amelia tried to inject enthusiasm into her voice, but Emma's sharp eyes caught her subdued tone. You're thinking about Dad again. It wasn't a question. Frank Mitchell's absence cast a shadow over every success, every milestone, every moment when Amelia should have felt proud of what they'd accomplished. He'd taken a consulting position with a firm in Phoenix, as far from Reno as he could get while remaining in the construction industry. I destroyed his sense of purpose, Emma. For 3 years, he believed he was rebuilding David's company through his own leadership. Now he knows it was all a performance. Was it? Emma leaned forward, her voice taking on the patient tone of someone who'd had this conversation before. Amelia, the safety protocols that kept our injury rate below industry standards, whose idea were those? The profit-sharing program that made our workers loyal when Sterling tried to recruit them? The client relationships that survived her pressure campaign? Your father's, but, no buts. Dad made those decisions. You provided financial stability, but he provided vision and leadership. Emma's voice softened. The problem isn't that you lied to him about ownership. The problem is that Dad spent his whole life believing that accepting help diminishes a man's worth. Before Amelia could respond, her assistant's voice came through the intercom. Ms. Johnson? There's someone here to see you. Says his name is Ryan Johnson. Amelia's stomach tightened. She'd spoken to her son only twice since the revelation of her ownership became public knowledge. Their relationship remained strained by years of misunderstanding about her financial situation and his own struggles with failure. Send him in. Ryan entered looking better than he had in months. The desperate edge that had characterized their last conversation was gone, replaced by something Amelia cautiously recognized as peace. He'd lost weight, his clothes were cleaner, and his eyes held a clarity that spoke of hard-won sobriety. Mom. He smiled tentatively. I know I should have called first, but I was in town for my 90-day meeting. 90-day meeting? Amelia's heart leaped with hope and fear. Gamblers Anonymous. Turns out acknowledging you have a problem is step one of a very long process. Ryan took the chair next to Emma, who discreetly gathered her materials to leave. No, Emma, please stay. What I have to say affects the company too. Emma settled back, her expression carefully neutral. I've been sober from gambling for 3 months now, Ryan continued. Part of the program involves making amends to people you've hurt. I owe you both an apology. Ryan, you don't need to. Yes, I do. His voice was firm. Mom, I spent years resenting your success while refusing to acknowledge my own failures. I blamed you for having money when I was broke, but I never asked myself why I was broke in the first place. He turned to Emma. And Emma, I'm sorry that my problems created pressure on Mom that affected her decisions about the company. My gambling debts put her in an impossible position. Amelia felt tears threatening. Sweetheart, your struggles were never your fault alone. I could have helped, should have helped, but I was so concerned with maintaining my anonymity that you couldn't be honest about your financial situation. I understand that now. Ryan's smile was sad but genuine. The therapist at the treatment center helped me see that we were both protecting secrets that were eating us alive. You were hiding your wealth, I was hiding my addiction, and neither of us could help the other because we couldn't tell the truth. Emma cleared her throat gently. Ryan, can I ask about the people you owed money to? The ones with connections to Sterling's operation? Ryan's expression darkened briefly. Handled. Turns out when you're completely honest about having no money and no prospects of getting any, even casino investors eventually write you off as a loss. Plus, once Sterling's acquisition fell through, they lost interest in using me as leverage. What are your plans now? Amelia asked. One day at a time, as they say in the program. I've got a job managing a small restaurant in Phoenix, nothing glamorous, but it's honest work and it keeps me away from casinos. Ryan paused, then added with careful hope, I was thinking maybe I could visit more often. Not for money or business advice, just to rebuild what we lost. I'd like that very much. After Ryan left, promising to call soon, Emma remained in her chair, studying Amelia's face. You know, seeing you with your son makes me understand Dad better. How so? Pride runs in families. Ryan couldn't accept help because it meant admitting failure. Dad can't come back because it means admitting he needs you. Emma's expression grew thoughtful. But maybe there's a way to give him what he needs without making him feel diminished. What do you mean? The Nevada Construction Industry Association is having their annual conference next month. Dad will be there, he never misses it. What if Silver State Development was represented by someone who could publicly acknowledge his contributions to the company's success? Amelia considered the suggestion. You think he'd listen to anything I had to say? I think he needs to hear that his life's work mattered. That saving the company wasn't your achievement alone. Emma's smile was mischievous. Besides, it's time the industry saw what a woman-owned construction company can accomplish. Dad always said David would have been proud of breaking barriers. That afternoon, Amelia found herself in the construction yard, watching Marcus Thompson train his replacement. At 65, Marcus had finally agreed to retire, though he'd negotiated staying on as a consultant for major projects. His successor was Elena Vasquez, a 30-year-old project manager who'd impressed everyone with her combination of technical knowledge and leadership skills. Mrs. Johnson, Marcus called out, using the title he'd maintained despite her new public role. Come see what Elena's figured out about the airport expansion timeline. As Elena explained her innovative approach to scheduling that would save weeks and thousands of dollars, Amelia reflected on the changes throughout the company. With Frank gone, Emma had stepped up to implement reforms that modernized everything from project management software to workplace safety protocols. The old boys network that had dominated Silver State's culture was being replaced by a meritocracy that valued competence over connections. Marcus, Amelia said as Elena headed back to her crew, do you think we're doing the right thing? All these changes? The weathered foreman considered her question seriously. Mrs. Johnson, Mr. David always said that a company either grows or dies. Can't stay the same forever. He adjusted his hard hat, a gesture that had become as familiar as his wisdom. Mr. Frank, he's a good man, but he was trying to preserve Something that needed to evolve. You and Emma, you're letting it become what it needs to be. Even if it means losing Frank permanently? Marcus's smile was sad but certain. Mr. Frank will find his way back when he's ready. Men like him don't stay away from good work forever. Just might take him longer than the rest of us to accept. That accepting help ain't the same as giving up. As evening approached and the construction yard quieted, Amelia stood in the same spot where she'd first confided in Marcus about her concerns regarding Victoria Sterling. The view hadn't changed, the same mountains, the same desert stretching toward California, but everything else was different. She was no longer the invisible observer, no longer hiding behind others' assumptions about a grieving widow's limitations. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions that only she could make as the acknowledged owner of Silver State Development. But tonight, for the first time in months, Amelia Johnson felt something approaching peace with the choice she'd made to step into the light. The foundation was stronger now, built on truth instead of secrets. Whether Frank would choose to build upon it remained to be seen, but the company David had envisioned, one that valued people over profit, innovation over tradition, was finally becoming reality. And perhaps that was legacy enough for any silent partner who'd found her voice. 1 year later, the Silver State Development Annual Company Picnic transformed the Nevada State Fairgrounds into a celebration that would have made David Johnson proud. Amelia stood beneath a white tent, watching families spread blankets across the grass while children ran between food stations and carnival games. The tradition she'd instituted 6 months after taking public control had become the highlight of the company calendar, a day when hierarchy dissolved and everyone simply enjoyed being part of something larger than themselves. Impressive turnout, Sarah Collins said, approaching with a notebook and the satisfied expression of a journalist who'd found a story worth telling. 250 employees plus families. That's growth. Quality growth, Amelia corrected, accepting a lemonade from a passing server. We turned down 3 contracts this quarter because they would have required us to compromise our safety standards or employee benefits. Sarah nodded approvingly. She'd become an unexpected ally after writing her follow-up article about Silver State's transformation, a piece that focused on sustainable business practices rather than corporate drama. Speaking of quality, have you seen this month's industry rankings? Amelia had seen them. Silver State Development now ranked 3rd in the Western region for employee satisfaction, 2nd for safety records, and 1st for on-time project completion. More importantly, they'd achieved those rankings while maintaining the highest average wages in Nevada's construction industry. The numbers are nice, Amelia said, but what matters more is that people want to work here, want to stay here, want to build careers here. Like Elena Vasquez? They both looked toward the project management station, where Elena was explaining bridge construction to a group of fascinated children using Lincoln logs and remarkable patience. In the year since taking over Marcus Thompson's role, she'd revolutionized Silver State's approach to large-scale projects while mentoring a new generation of female engineers and project managers. Elena's just the beginning, Amelia said with pride. We've got apprenticeship programs with 3 high schools now, internships with 2 universities, and we're partnering with women's organizations to recruit talent that other companies overlook. A commotion near the main stage drew their attention. Emma Mitchell was testing the microphone, preparing for the afternoon's presentation that would announce Silver State's largest contract win in company history, a 5-year partnership to build sustainable housing developments throughout northern Nevada. Emma's come into her own, Sarah observed. Hard to believe she was being dismissed as the boss's daughter just 18 months ago. The best leaders often emerge when circumstances demand it. Amelia's voice carried a note of maternal pride, though Emma wasn't her daughter. She's everything this company needed: vision, competence, and the courage to challenge outdated assumptions. The microphone squealed briefly as Emma adjusted it. Good afternoon, everyone. If I could have your attention. The crowd gradually quieted, families gathering closer to the stage. Amelia noticed Ryan standing near the back with his girlfriend, Michelle, a teacher he'd met in Phoenix who'd helped him maintain his gambling sobriety for over a year now. He caught Amelia's eye and smiled, a genuine expression that still surprised her with its warmth. Today marks our first full year operating under new leadership, Emma began, her voice carrying clearly across the fairgrounds. It's been a year of growth, challenges, and remarkable achievements that belong to all of us. Emma launched into a presentation that highlighted not just financial success, but the human stories behind the numbers: the apprentice who'd become a certified welder, the safety innovation that had prevented accidents on 3 major projects, the community partnerships that had brought construction skills training to underserved neighborhoods. But before we announce our biggest news, Emma continued, I want to acknowledge someone whose contributions to this company span more than a quarter century. Amelia's breath caught as a familiar figure emerged from behind the stage. Frank Mitchell looked older, his hair whiter, but his bearing still carried the authority of someone who'd spent decades commanding respect through competence rather than position. The crowd erupted in applause and cheers that spoke to genuine affection. Frank approached the microphone with the careful dignity of someone who'd spent months wrestling with pride and purpose. "Thank you for that welcome. It's good to be home." He paused, his eyes finding Amelia in the crowd. 18 months ago, I learned some difficult truths about myself and this company. I learned that my pride had blinded me to realities I should have faced, that my stubbornness had nearly cost all of you your jobs, and that accepting help isn't the same as admitting defeat. The fairgrounds had gone completely silent except for the distant sound of carnival music. I also learned that the best leaders aren't the ones who never make mistakes, they're the ones who take responsibility for their mistakes and work to do better. Frank's voice strengthened. Amelia Johnson saved this company when I was too proud to save it myself. But more than that, she's proven that strong leadership comes in many forms, and sometimes the quiet observer sees things that those of us making noise miss entirely. Frank gestured toward Amelia, and she felt every eye in the crowd turn to her. "It's my privilege to announce that I'm returning to Silver State Development as Senior Vice President of Operations, working alongside the best leadership team this company has ever had." The applause was thunderous, but Amelia barely heard it. Frank was coming home. Not as the man who'd built the company, but as someone willing to help it grow beyond what he'd originally envisioned. After the formal presentations ended and the crowd dispersed back to picnic activities, Frank approached Amelia near the dessert station. They stood awkwardly for a moment, two old friends navigating the aftermath of betrayal and forgiveness. "Frank, Amelia, let me say this first." Frank's voice was quiet but firm. "I've spent a year in Phoenix learning to swallow my pride, and it's been the hardest education of my life. But I've also learned something else. David would have been proud of what you've built here. Not just the financial success, but the culture, the values, the way you've honored his memory while making the company better than he and I ever imagined." Tears threatened, but Amelia kept her voice steady. "David would have been proud of both of us. For building something worth saving, and for being strong enough to let it evolve." "Partners?" Frank extended his hand. "Partners," Amelia agreed, shaking it firmly. As the sun began to set over the Nevada mountains, Amelia found herself standing in the same spot where she'd watched Frank pace nervously before his return to the stage. But this time, she wasn't observing from the shadows. She was part of the celebration, acknowledged and accepted as the leader she'd always been but had hidden for too long. Emma approached with a champagne glass and a satisfied smile. "So, how does it feel to finally be visible?" "Terrifying and liberating in equal measure," Amelia admitted. "For 3 years, I could observe and judge without taking responsibility for the consequences. Now every decision affects real people's lives." "Welcome to leadership," Emma laughed. "The good news is, you don't have to make those decisions alone anymore." They were joined by Marcus Thompson, who'd driven up from his retirement home in Las Vegas specifically for the picnic. At 66, he looked relaxed in a way that spoke to well-earned rest, but his eyes still held the sharp intelligence that had made him invaluable. "Mrs. Johnson," Marcus said, using the title that had become both respectful and affectionate. "Mr. David would have gotten a kick out of seeing this. All these families, all this success, built on the foundation he started but grown into something bigger than he probably imagined." "He always said the best companies outgrow their founders," Amelia replied. "I think we're finally proving him right." As the evening wound down and families began packing up their picnic supplies, Amelia reflected on the journey that had brought her here. A year ago, she'd been forced out of the shadows by Victoria Sterling's predatory tactics. 6 months ago, she'd feared that revealing her ownership would destroy every authentic relationship she'd built. Instead, the truth had created something stronger, a company built on genuine respect rather than hidden manipulation, partnerships based on mutual understanding rather than secret power, and leadership that drew strength from collaboration rather than isolation. Sarah Collins approached for a final comment, her article deadline looming. "Any thoughts on what the future holds for Silver State Development?" Amelia looked around the fairgrounds one last time, at Ryan helping Michelle pack their picnic basket, at Emma discussing expansion plans with excited project managers, at Frank teaching a group of children how to tie proper construction knots, at hundreds of employees and their families celebrating not just financial success but genuine community. "The future," Amelia said, "looks like everything David Johnson dreamed it could be. And maybe a little bit more." As the cars pulled out of the fairgrounds and the Nevada night settled over Reno, Amelia Johnson, no longer the silent partner, no longer the invisible observer, felt the deep satisfaction that comes from building something lasting. The company would continue to grow, continue to evolve, continue to provide good work for good people in a world that didn't always value either. And perhaps that was the greatest legacy of all, not the wealth created or the contracts won, but the proof that business could be both profitable and principled, that leadership could be both strong and humble, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is step out of the shadows and into the light. The silent partner had found her voice, and Silver State Development would never be the same. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.